And welcome back to another Mystery Monday video on my channel. This case is one that I personally find very interesting, and I hope that you guys will too, and that is specifically why I chose this case to kind of get back into YouTube. So with that being said, I really hope that you guys enjoy this video, and let's get right into today's case. On September 29th, 1988, a young boy who resided in Sao Paulo, Brazil, had just left school and headed down to the Billing Reservoir to do some hunting. Now, this was something that he did often after school, so he was very aware of the area, he knew it quite well, and so he headed down, and he thought that it must have been his lucky day when he came across a large group of falcons surrounding what he assumed was the body of a deceased animal. Now, he snuck up on these birds like you do when you're hunting, and used his sling to shoot a rock at them, causing the birds to flee away from whatever it was that they were surrounding. And to this little boy's horror, that is when he saw that this was not the body of a deceased animal, but that of an extremely mutilated human being. This little boy, obviously traumatized, ran to the nearby city to tell some adults about what he had just discovered. And after telling the adults that he had talked to, police were called almost immediately. Now, this area where this body was discovered is actually a very common place for bodies to be found. At least one death each year happens there by somebody drowning in the reservoir. And on top of that, this is a very common place for people to dump gang killing victims. For this specific reason, police didn't take this phone call quite seriously. They just assumed that it was another either dumped body or another drowning that had taken place in the area. So they actually originally only sent out 2 officers and a fire truck. But after the officers arrived at the scene, they quickly realized that this murder was beyond anything they had ever seen before, and they didn't really know how to deal with it, so they had to call in backup. Now, just very shortly after the 2 police officers had arrived on the scene was swarming with multiple police officers and medical professionals. From this point out, the specifics of this case are very slim and hard to come across, but that is actually why I chose to jump into this case today, because there is so much secrecy surrounding this man's death that I think that is specifically why this case is so important to learn about and so interesting to hear. Police were able to identify this man using his dental records, but due to the wishes of the family, I will not be revealing his identity here, as they did want him to remain anonymous. But I will say that if you dig deep enough into this case on your own, it is possible for you to discover this man's identity. But what I will say is this was a 53-year-old man who suffered from both epilepsy as well as alcoholism, which will come into play later on in this case. And he frequented the reservoir for fishing purposes and was actually reported by his family as missing 3 days prior to his body being discovered. The victim's clothing were found in a ball hidden on the opposite side of the woods where the body was found. So his body was found on one side of the woods and his clothing was found on the other side of the woods. Now, originally police thought that this was a little bit odd, but his family said that this was something that he did often because he would strip down and swim to the other side where the fishing conditions were a little bit better. I'm sure many of you have experienced something where you see a large group of police officers either arresting somebody or entering a home or some kind of area, and it sparks your interest, so you watch the news for days and days following you seeing this event, trying to figure out what happened. You keep checking the internet, trying to figure out if, what was going on at that time, why the police were arresting that person or entering that area. And that is exactly what the residents of this area were doing. They were waiting for the news to break of what happened because they seen the police entering the area, and they knew that there was something going on, but they didn't know exactly what it was. But news really didn't break of this case at all. They really kept it quite quiet. The police didn't talk about it, and in fact, by the next morning after the body had been discovered, the scene was cleaned so well that it looked as if nothing had ever even happened there. It is said that the only thing that really remained suggesting that something had taken place at that scene were footprints covering the area that were left by police officers as well as the medical professionals, and some little ripped pieces of police tape. Because of how well this case was concealed, it made it very easy for it to fade out of people's minds and be almost completely forgotten. That is until the year of 1994, 6 years after the body had been discovered. Someone presumably who worked for the government found this case so horrific and traumatizing that they felt that it needed to be released to the public. The coroner's report as well as the crime scene photos were leaked to the public, and multiple reports continued to come out about this case over the following weeks. Now, as I usually do in these types of videos, you can find the crime scene photos as well as the photos of the victim online, but I will not be inserting them here for respect for the victim as well as the victim's family. But I just wanted to give a warning: if you do go look for these photos, they are extremely graphic. This victim had been subjected to such bad mutilation that this is something that nobody has ever seen before this case had happened and since this case has been discovered. This has never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. The victim's eyes had been removed from his body and the eyelids had been cut away from the eyes. His tongue had been cut out and his left ear had been cut off. And the lips and flesh around the jawbone as well as the neck had been cut off with a large piece of the jawbone missing. Both armpits had puncture holes in them that were about 1.5 inches in diameter, and with them being on the opposite side of the body were completely symmetrical. These holes were also found all over the victim's arms and legs. All of these holes were the exact same size and were believed to have been inflicted in the same way. On top of this, a lot of the victim's flesh was missing, along with some of his larger muscles. The victim's liver, kidney, stomach, both intestines, and pancreas had all been removed, causing the victim's chest and stomach to be very sunken in. Now, something that everyone who comes across this case finds extremely odd is that there actually wasn't any holes found big enough on the body to remove these organs. However, there was all of those small holes found all over the body, and there was a hole where the belly button should have been that was the exact same size as the other holes, meaning it was 1.5 inches. Because these holes were the only ones that were found on the victim's body, it is speculated that maybe the organs were somehow sucked out of them. The colon was also missing from the victim's body, leaving a very large hole where the rectum should have been. The victim had also been lacerated, and every single drop of blood that was within his body had been completely drained. None of the wounds on the body showed any signs of bleeding while they were being made. Now, this could be for one of two reasons. The first reason being that either the blood was being sucked out of the body at the same time as the wounds were being inflicted, or the wounds were done so precisely that the victim didn't bleed. As you probably could have guessed by this point, if you're really into cases like this, after studying the body and looking at the wounds and incisions, it was discovered that almost all of them had a surgical quality to them. It was determined that the victim was completely conscious while the wounds were being inflicted, but was somehow paralyzed. Now, naturally, we would assume that some drugs were given to this man to make him either not feel the pain or put him in a comatose state, but toxicology reports showed that this was not the case, as no drugs that would have done this were found in the victim's system. Another strange thing is that there was no sign that the victim had actually fought back while being attacked. Now, the victim's skull cap was completely undamaged, but there was signs of a cerebral edema, which means that his skull cap was slightly swollen. The autopsy listed the cause of death as an acute hemorrhaging with multiple traumatisms. Basically, this means that the victim died of cardiac arrest due to extreme pain. The report also stated that there was signs of torture. Again, the victim had suffered from epilepsy as well as alcoholism. So right off the bat, police kind of came to the conclusion that they thought that maybe he had mixed the epileptic medication with alcohol, and this caused some kind of reaction, causing him to fall down and pass away. But that doesn't really explain the mutilation part, so police kind of said, maybe animals came along and feasted on the body. But this was quickly ruled out, as the signs on the body were not done by an animal. There has been no animal found that could have inflicted these type of wounds on the body. And also, decomposition hadn't quite set in yet, so it is rare that big, large animals would come along and feast on a body that wasn't decomposed. It is also very unlikely for an animal to have eaten this much flesh and somehow removed the organs so cleanly. But despite the unlikelihood of any of this happening, investigators still concluded that this death was natural and said that it was a result of the victim's lifestyle choices and his illness. It is widely believed that authorities really tried to cover this case up. Not only because it was never released to the public until 6 years after the case had actually taken place, but also the fact that it was released by somebody who was completely anonymous. On top of that, many of the newspapers and things like that that did end up covering this case report the area in which the body was discovered completely incorrectly, suggesting to a lot of people that maybe police and investigators who covered this case leaked the wrong information to throw the public off. Now, just like many cases like this, there is a group of people who do believe what the police report does say is true. Meaning that many people believe that this cause of death was natural. They think that it was caused due to maybe alcoholism, maybe the epilepsy, maybe he had a seizure that caused him to have heart failure due to the fact that he was an alcoholic. All of this could go together and lead to his death. But none of these specific reasons have any kind of explanation as to why the body was so badly mutilated. It doesn't explain why the organs were missing, how the organs were removed. Any kind of thing to do with the state of the body is just not explained. So this situation or this theory is just not one that I personally believe is accurate. The next theory that I'm going to talk about that is widely speculated on Reddit and other places where this case is talked about is the possibility that this could have possibly been murder. Now, this theory was quickly ruled out by authorities as there was no evidence suggesting that murder had taken place. There also was no sign of a struggle or signs that the victim had fought with anybody prior to his death. On top of that, the only footprints that were found at the scene were those from the boy who had discovered the body as well as the victim himself, meaning that it was very hard to place another human being at the crime scene until the police had gotten there. On top of that, authorities also brought up the question that they don't really think that it's possible that another human being could have even done this, because some of the incisions that were found on the body were so precise that they would have needed to have been done by an extremely skilled surgeon, and even then it is really unlikely that they would have been able to get these wounds and incisions to be so precise. On top of that, they also don't think that this is possible due to the fact that the victim had never been drugged. So how would the surgeon have been able to do this while still causing the victim pain while he was conscious without him moving or being asleep? Removing organs by some kind of suction device is actually something that is used in many medical procedures, but the organs do come out very damaged. So there wouldn't be any reason for somebody to want to remove his organs like this to sell them on the black market or anything like that. So the main purpose of somebody murdering him in this fashion would have to be for pure torture. Many of the residents who live around this area who have heard of this case now have come forward saying that a lot of them do believe that this death was caused by some sort of cryptid creature. Now, many of the residents living within this area have reported seeing many strange creatures living within the reservoir. There is also a lot of strange things that happen in that area, and although this death is the main one of its kind with such brutal mutilation and things like that, they say that things quite similar to this, although not this extreme, do happen quite often in that area. But again, there's no evidence to suggest solidly that this is the case. And again, a lot of these cases aren't as brutal as people believe them to be and can be linked to other things such as murders, animals, things like that. And of course, this wouldn't be in my channel if we didn't talk about the possibility that there was some extraterrestrial involvement in this case. Now, many people right off the bat, because of the strange circumstances of this case, have tried to relate it to alien involvement. Not only that, but because many of the animal mutilations from all over the world, where the animals were mutilated and investigated by people, had very similar incisions and very similar wounds that were also found on the victim's body. Now, something that I would just like to mention again in this case, from my own opinion, is that this case also really reminded me right off the bat of the Zygmunt Adamski case, which again is also believed to have been due to aliens. So that is just something to keep in mind. And that is really all there is to say on this case. That is pretty much all of the theories, and you guys always ask me what theory I think personally happened, and usually I'm really on the fence and I don't know what I think, and in this case I don't really have one solid one that I do believe in strongly, but I definitely am leaning more towards either the fact that he was murdered and somebody removed his organs, or that there was some kind of alien involvement. Now, as you guys know, I am a strong believer in cryptids, but the reason that I don't think that cryptids could have been responsible for this is because it had such surgical qualities to it, and that just screams to me more of something along the lines of either humans did it or aliens did it. So that's just my opinion, but I'd love to know your guys' opinion on this case, so make sure to leave that in the comments down below. My heart sincerely goes out to the victim as well as his family. This can never be easy, finding or losing a loved one, but especially not in this manner where so much pain and mutilation and things like that had taken place. It is just absolutely heartbreaking and so sickening. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!